Good morning. So welcome to our webinar. We're going to give everyone a few more minutes to log in. If you can just hold for just say 2 or 3 more minutes as we get folks coming into the call, we would appreciate it. Thank you. We'll get started. All right, I think we are about ready to start. We've given everybody a couple of minutes. I want to start by introducing myself. Thank you for joining us today for our Full Steam Ahead series. I am delighted to host today's event, and we have some amazing speakers today. My name is Carrie Fellers. I am the Director of Membership for Geothermal Rising. I am delighted to, as I said, host today. I want to thank our organizational members that help make programs like this happen. Our Earth Energy visionaries, Baker Hughes, Calpine, Ever, Exceed, who's one of our speakers today, Schlumberger and Turbident, and then our geothermal champions, Burns and McDonald, CASO, BHE Renewables, Chevron, EggGeo, Expro, and Fervo, Halliburton, Curita, Neighbors, NOV, Ormat, Oxy, Sinclair, and Southern Company, and then our Earth Energy enthusiasts, Baseload Capital, Central Washington University, DTech Rotary Steerables, Geologica, NREL, Valoric, XGS Energy, and Zanskar. And then I also want to make sure you're aware of some of our upcoming events. We will have an geothermal hub at Image here in Houston in August, and then the Indigenous Geothermal Symposium in October in Reno, which will precede the Geothermal Rising Conference, or GRC as it's more commonly known. They're at the end of October in Reno. And then the Geothermal Investment Forum will be here in Houston, April 7th and 8th in 2026. And then also we'll have Capitol Hill Day, April 28th and 30th in DC in 2026. So we hope you join us at some of these additional events. Thank you. So now it is my pleasure to introduce Nasikul Islam. He is joining us today as a seasoned expert with over 24 years of global experience in drilling, completions, and drilling transformation across both oil and gas and geothermal sectors. Based in Houston, Nasikul has led operations and technology programs for top operators like Occidental, Husky, Talisman, Saudi Aramco, and Qatar Energy, as well as advanced geothermal projects, including the Utah Forge Initiative under the U.S. Department of Energy. He brings deep expertise in HPHT well design, geothermal completions, and directional drilling, with extensive field experience in South Texas, the Gulf of Mexico, Alaska, and our international deepwater environments. He has also driven enterprise-scale digital drilling transformation using agile delivery, design thinking, and operational change management to bring real-time technologies into the rig and subsurface space. He holds a Master's of Science in Petroleum Engineering and Nanotechnology from the University of Utah, a chemical engineering degree from Texas A&M, and is currently completing an MBA in Finance and Strategy from the University of Calgary. Nasik's blend of operational depth and digital foresight makes him a key voice in advancing the geothermal industry. So it is my pleasure to introduce Nasikul. Take it away, sir.
Thank you, Carrie. I hope you can all hear me all right. I'm humbled to be here. Appreciate the introduction. Let me know when you can actually see my screen.
We can see it. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, from wherever you're joining. So I'm just going to focus a bit on how we can accelerate towards the geothermal 3.0 energy, and how we can make it a commodity price from the geothermal side. And why am I calling it Geothermal 3.0? I'll also mention that because it has kind of evolved over the hydrothermal systems into the enhanced geothermal systems, and now, going into the next generation geothermal systems, which are like the closed loops. And so that's why I'm calling it a 3.0. So we're sort of in that evolution, going from a geothermal 1 to 3, and how we can actually make accelerate that is probably the next challenge that we all face, which is a good challenge to have. So if you're really looking at your electricity prices and costing, at your homes, and I was looking at it this week because I just have my 1 year up with a provider, and I'm trying to fix my electricity price for 12 or 18 months so that it doesn't move up. How I, and I'm looking at this going constantly up, but then also seeing a lot of the alternative pricing from like solar coming, being very, very competitive to the normal, energy price. And this is just at a home, right? But if you think about, and this is what the EIA chart shows on the bottom left-hand corner. A lot of the residential electric bills, probably in Hawaii and Connecticut are twice as those in New Mexico and Utah. But if you think about a benchmark, it's probably around that 15, 16 and a half cents kilowatt hour. And there's a lot of energy impoverished in communities around Texas or around New Mexico, around Utah. That still it's quite pricey for them to have that 16 and a half cents per kilowatt hour. So if you think about how much demand is going to be there, or with the data centers, there's a recently published map from NREL that talked about a lot of these data centers that are either happening or have happened or construction in progress. As you can see with the map on the top right hand, there are orange circles showing these are under construction. The ones sort of yellow showing they're operating, and then obviously the white bubbles are showing this proposed. So there's going to be a huge energy demand from the data centers and from the industry side, not only just from the residential side, obviously, where obviously there's that population increase that's happening. So from the geothermal side of things, from the GTO office, there is a liftoff report that shows really the total addressable market, and how the demand and prices are increasing. But there's also, coming from the oil and gas side, thinking about how the volatility has been. It's either a feast or a famine in the oil and gas. But with the electricity energy demand, it's pretty steady. So if we can actually have a very fixed, low-cost electricity using renewables, which are sustainable, we can probably really go around these volatilities and layoffs as well, right? I'm sure a lot of folks that are listening in are from the oil and gas who have actually gone through some of these. Myself including, I've had that, and it's not a good feeling, right? There's definitely some margins. I think we have to create those margins, and that's what I'm really going to be kind of focusing on in this webinar is how do we accelerate, and just like the oil and gas, comparing the lifting costs and selling costs, and how we can actually have more projects and portfolio type investments. Probably definitely it will help us get there, but I think we're still crawling. We're not running yet, and how we can actually have more running, because there's a big gap in investment, as you can see, and that's basically also has been published. Nothing here is very secret. It's just understanding where to really look at the data for, and a lot of that is there, and a lot of those challenges also exist, right? So I think instead of really going after saying, the reducing emissions and zero targets. I like to, within Exceed, we have a mission and vision of how we can reduce energy poverty. So that means we have to really fix or produce this electricity at lowest cost, that we can actually have much more uh, spread and reach to the people that really need it. So I like to call it reduced energy poverty. Myself coming from a very small town in Asian subcontinent, and where I have actually studied without electricity in my high school, or and it also reflects that a lot of people still today are out of electricity, right? But I think there is a lot of potential with geothermal. It is definitely a 24/7 base load, but only if we can break the barriers to scale. So if some of you have seen some of these LCO equations, and these have been published in the NREL, websites and the IEA reports, this is basically some of the equations. But I think what we are really looking at, and I'm an engineer, I like equations. So if I want to really reduce the LCOE cost, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I want to have my denominator go up and my numerator go down, right? So really, you are trying to reduce the LCOE. That means you have to stabilize, maximize the energy production. That there is no thermal degradation. That means you have to increase the plant, the capacities, or engineer the system in such a way that we can actually have a stable energy production for 30, 40 plus years, so that we can actually get to that level, and also decreasing a lot of these numerator equations. And I think there is a lot of that initiative that has happened with that has been actually spoken about in the news medium. But there is still more, I think, work to be done, because a lot of these are one-off cases or single projects. And I'll show you, if we want to really target a very low LCOE, how many projects, that means equivalent to number of wells we probably need to drill, by a very simple calculation that I have coming up. And sometimes a lot of these costs that are reported are probably not, they don't have the full equation in, contributors to the LCOE, right? So for example, some of the costs from like drilling, it really doesn't have a lot of the stimulation costs, or maybe tie-in costs or NPTs and contingencies. Those are just lumped up in one drilling cost. But when you talk about well construction, it really breaks down into a lot of other costs. And again, coming from the oil and gas, we had to break that down into processes that really contributes to that LCOE as well. And then if you really look at, breaking it down into EGS, or, hydrothermal, and the closed loop systems, can we also reduce that operation and maintenance, or if we have to re-drill wells, or those costs need to be going down. So anything on the numerator has to definitely go down, and that would include, for example, like a lot of the completion costs, a lot of the stimulation costs, or even the heat recovery. So that's basically what you have in the numerator has to be increased, right? And that is what you're really looking at in terms of um, uh, the LCOE in a nutshell. So this was recently published, and I think there is also a factor of present value, financial calculations, modeling from 40 years to 30, 30 years. What's your WACC, weighted average cost of capital? What's your IRRs? What's your cost of equity and debt? Because a lot of these are actually debt financed, or what is that standardized number? So I think over the last 10 years or so, geothermal 2.0, which is basically an enhanced geothermal system, stimulation and fracturing, has come a long way to produce, definitely a low cost LCOE, because the last Lazard's report is showing about $60 to $100 LCOE. That means it has really come down quite competitively with solar or wind. So that means there is a lot of acceleration, there's a lot of momentum that's happening. But I think it's happened over 10 years, and one of my takeaways, I think it needs to happen faster, and how can we actually make it happen faster, right? So, and that's what my takeaway from this slide is: can we actually have a standardized WACC or standardized cost debt equities? The geothermal technologies has really evolved and has made great strides over the last 10 years, but I think geothermal as a whole goes back all the way from the 80s, right? I mean, if you look at all the geothermal establishment in California that have been there, I call it geothermal 1.0. That's basically been there for the last so many years right now, and it's still producing. So you can see the 50 years is definitely proven. The potential of geothermal is proven. It's just how the 2.0 and the 3.0 can actually produce 5 or 10 times more output. So that means I need to really increase my denominator to have that LCOE come down. And that's basically what everybody is actually working towards, right? So this is my quick, spreadsheet calculation that if I want to target, and I'm assuming my lifting costs for oil and gas to be very equivalent, although there will be some, differences between a barrel of oil versus a barrel of oil equivalent of thermal heat to the geothermal LCOE, but I'm assuming this would be the same. And if I'm targeting my lifting cost to be $10, and the target geothermal LCOE to be also like $10, with obviously a capacity factor of 90%, project lifetime of 30, you're really looking at, the cost to heat that $10 per megawatt would be about, for a 30-year project life cycle, I really need to reduce my costs by 75% and increase my efficiencies by about 4 to 5 times. So that means I need about 3,000 wells, assuming I have 50 wells right now drilled, to really achieve that $10 target. So that shows that we really need a high volume type well scenario investment or portfolios, multiple projects to really create that big bang for geothermal. And it can be done. This was, again, it's not that it wasn't done in the oil and gas. I mean, if you look at Permian as a good example, although they do have a very quick decline rates, the shale gas has a 5-year decline rate, and then you have to re-drill the wells to kind of keep the production stable. So your operation and maintenance, but they do have that consistency and rinse and repeat type wells. So those wells are really developed, drilled, a pattern. There's a predictable pattern to drilling those wells. And in order for us in geothermal to get there, we have to also have that consistency, repeatability to make sure that we can actually drill that well within, say, if we say 5 million, it has to come within 2 or 3% of that 5 million and make it consistent over. But that can only happen with multiple wells, as this simple spreadsheet calculation over the back of the handkerchief shows 3,000 wells. Can I actually, that means I have to really have that 3,000 wells. And I'm assuming a learning rate of 21%. So that means over time, that basically my reduction has to double, about 6 doublings from 40 megawatt, $40 LCOE to a $10 LCOE. That's what I'm targeting, right? So my 40 to 10 would actually really have to have a 20% learning rate with almost, with a logarithmic rate. That's how with that 3,000 wells. So that's another thing, right? I think another piece to really note here is we want to commoditize this geothermal industry, really learning from the oil and gas, to kind of have all the important inputs that are actually usually missed out, the well construction, and that's why I like to call it well construction cost rather than drilling. And this is a very, important terminology in the oil and gas. It's actually this is when the shale gas boom happened. A lot of the drilling and completion folks started sitting in the same floor, coming together, And then that's when that productivity increased. So they were not on different, the asset team was not on a different floor. The reservoir team was not on a different floor. So it was basically, if it was a Permian, a Wolfcamp asset, it actually was in that same floor. And that really helped in increasing the productivity. And that's when this terminology, well construction, started coming along. You're really talking about land cost, exploration, if there is any, like, basically that would include geology, the drilling, and then the completions costs and production time, all the contingencies that you would actually put in. So that would make up that whole well construction, and not just only drilling costs, or not just completion costs, and not just production. Because at the end of the day, that authorization for expenditure, which is also known as an AFE, really rolls up into that bucket, because all that will still contribute to the LCOE, as you saw in the equations, right? And some of the metrics, we know this is defining dollars per barrel in the geothermal world. What the scope is. Usually in the oil and gas, there is an operating cost that's included, but in geothermal, there is a capex, there is operating, there is land and reinvestment. So I think there is a development cost is different. So there's a little bit of the metrics that are different between oil and gas and geothermal, because geothermal looks at it as a full cycle rather than just an OPEX cost or a CAPEX cost, right? Normally, a lot of the CAPEX costs in the oil and gas usually is written as one time sunk, or it doesn't go into that lifting for the next 5 years, right? So there's definitely some few metrics that you have to normalize based on the efficiencies, but I think overall we still know that we need more projects and high volume projects to really reach to that oil and gas level. And this is something that's we are developing, as a sort of the financial metrics, or as the scorecard or balanced scorecards. In the oil and gas, we used to always have metrics such as the Rushmore, or 10,000 feet per day, or everybody does about 3,000 feet per day nowadays, or 5,000 a mile a day. So that's basically, those are the kind of metrics. But is that a standard metrics for consistency, or everybody has their own metrics, and are they actually following it to the dot, to the Bible? Because a lot of those things go into the equations of the LCOE again. Because if I break those high level LCOE inputs on the numerator, I will come up with all the different KPIs that I can actually incorporate and integrate into my balanced scorecard systems. Wellbore sizes, flow rates, those could be in a different level. But if I want to really dig deeper into a micro level, I want to really look at my efficiencies and mass balances and downhole pressure. So that again, a lot of this can be related with the process of oil and gas drilling. So it's just coming up with a standardized metric that we can actually use to measure a lot of those LCO inputs. And the reason I have this downward arrow, because in the oil and gas, usually when the oil price was high, everybody looked at this, only the top arrow in the food chain. But when oil price is low, again, those volatility really pushed us to go beyond the limits. And I think in the renewable side, because it is pretty fixed and pretty constant, everybody only looks at a very low margin and low rate. They haven't really gone through those ups and downs. They haven't really looked into a lot of the additional hidden, invisible, micro level KPIs, right? And I think that's one thing that to kind of evolve from this is, if we are really targeting that many number of wells, there's going to be more, a lot of those KPIs kind of coming out as well. Just kind of, to really summarize and recap is going back to the equation and fundamentals. How can we slash my CapEx, OpEx surface? That's all in the numerator. How we can actually reduce. A lot of the costs and days have been reduced. We can see that, but I think the next phase is consistency and repeatability. So can it actually be repeated? if it's 16 days for that much length of lateral, can that be, repeated? Because the low-hanging fruit is always probably it goes into that exponential decline, but there is a flat rate, where you cannot really improve anymore, but then you really have to look for those low-hanging fruits again. Can you actually make it very modular, very scalable, standardized? Can we increase this is the denominator portion of the equation. Can we actually increase that energy output using a lot of AI techniques, targeted reservoir monitoring to make sure proactively, we can actually understand when the decline, if the decline happens way more than a threshold that's being set? Or can we increase that capacity factor assumption in the formula to 99.99%? And how do we do that, right? And developing an operators consortiums and trackers that kind of helps to standardize for the geothermal community, because I think, although geothermal is emerging, maybe 2.0, 3.0 is emerging, but 1.0 has been there since the 80s. So I think as 2.0 and 3.0 comes, rapidly scales up, we probably have that kind of common, we know there's definitely some common areas where we can have the data quality, standardization of KPIs and reviews and all that. Um, and really going for investors and policymakers, how we can actually streamline a lot of the permitting issues, cost reporting. There is always a WTI sticker in the stock market, but there is no LCOE index sticker, right? Maybe there's so I think there's like the oil price WTI at $60 or $70. You can see that, but what is that geothermal tickers? Because really to make it an energy commodity, now we need to start thinking of putting that on the stock. Do we have enough volume? The trade volume and all that. So I think by attacking both sides, numerator and denominator, we can usually cut that unit cost, double the capacity in a very short time. And this is an example, by the way, 10 to 20, obviously the DOE Earth short target is 40, but I was just doing my scenario exercise with 10 to 20, that this is, like to how much, just to show you as an example, how many projects you need really to go from a 40 to a 20. So if it is at 80 right now, and we want to go to a 40, it will pretty much be similar because it is still scaling to that in that ratio, because that would close that 2.4 times the gap of the lifting cost, right? And I think this is just a quick, my comparing differences between the geothermal oil and gas and oil and gas, project strategies, how we really need to do more portfolios and not single off projects. So we can really de-risk by having multiple project locations, multiple wells, high volume wells. How can we streamline that go to market? Because I think between oil and gas and geothermal still is a lengthy timeline. Often usually with the interconnection grids, there's no interconnection maybe capacity or grid capacity. That is still definitely a problem. There's a long lead item on that. But how can we actually get that accelerated by thinking about innovative and engineered ways to really create, grid, sort of a virtual grid, electricity. Modular topside equipments will be important really to have that standardization. And yeah, I just talked about grid access. So I mean, you can see the geothermal here is pretty, it's still very, but this is, I think, not updated 2023, but it is still very low in that y-axis in terms of thermal units. And it also started in the 80s. It hasn't really taken off. But because of the barrier to entry, I think wind and solar took off faster because of that capital investment. But and again, not every place will have a lot of land. I think US, Texas is blessed with a lot of land, but in some states like California or even where I come from, there is not a lot of land. So I think we have to see how geothermal can be optimized with the footprint, because again, using the proven oil and gas technologies, multilaterals, directional drilling, that you can optimize a lot of the surface footprint. So those haven't been really thought about and looked at to really reduce a lot of the costs. And this probably needs to shoot up, have a hyperbolic curve sometime soon. But I think that's just waiting to happen, right? Yeah, and with that, maybe I'll take some questions, or if I don't know if Rick is here, I'll hand it over to you, Brian, and Kerry.
Thank you. Absolutely. I think Ricky is having some computer problems, so I'm not sure he's going to be able to join us today. So unfortunately, uh, we're going to miss out on his presentation. But we do have some questions that are coming in through the Q&A here online, and then I've had a couple other come in through email and chat. So I have a number of things to ask you. The first question from our online Q&A is from Miss Elizabeth, and it says, interesting to have an international geothermal index similar to WTI, but an index is based on a longer term PPA. We wouldn't see fluctuations like we would with WTI. Is that a correct thinking?
Yes, that's a good point. I think that's you're right. But with a stable PPA, but and that's because it's actually going to the grid. But if there is other gridless type connections, then you're probably looking at different fluctuations in that PPA price probably. And again, this is something that still needs to be probably ironed out. But yeah, I mean, you wouldn't see that many fluctuations on a stable grid. But then it is a disruptor. So we think about how we can actually create a disruptive technology with geothermal, right? Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have another question online is what are your thoughts on how to reduce drilling costs?
Well, I mean, drilling costs are definitely, I think, reduced quite a bit, but now, it's reduced for a certain hole size and for a certain output. While the drilling costs, if I'm thinking about only drilling, not well construction. So drilling costs are pretty, if you really benchmark with the oil and gas, if I'm going to be drilling in an area where there's offset oil and gas data. Maybe they're old, maybe they're new, but there's a lot of offset oil and gas data, for example, Eagle Ford or Haynesville. Can you benchmark with the oil and gas data to set targets, right? That would be one of my suggestions. So instead of really benchmarking with a geothermal well, can we benchmark with an oil and gas well to really set those targets for those areas? Because you're still passing through the same formation, you're passing through the same kind of boundaries, same kind of and the only maybe differences will be the different hole sizes and uh, you know different tubulars that we would put in. But I think also getting some really good rigs within the contract strategy. There has to be a big contract strategy as well in terms of procurements or really getting hedged pricing or in terms of long-term pricing with the suppliers and vendors. This will be important because that is it's definitely going to contribute to that. But again, with drilling costs, there's so much obviously you can do once it has reached that decline stage. There's the low-hanging fruits, like everybody looks at connection times nowadays, right? Even I know from the last Stanford workshop I attended, even I know Ormet presented a paper that was actually speaking about connection time. So I know everybody is looking at it, but I think in the renewables, people are just looking at it because oil and gas has been looking at it, right? So there's definitely some technology transfer and lessons transfer. So having more in touch with the oil and gas teams, setting up some of these, operating consortiums or with suppliers, with KPIs, really getting those KPIs tightened is going to be important for reducing those costs.
Fantastic. And if I can just ask a follow up on that, and I appreciate the perspective about contracting and the drilling times, but you alluded quite a bit to well construction in your presentation. Can you talk about some of the opportunities there for cost reduction and synergies with oil and gas?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think if you look at the equations I had for well construction, let me just go back here. Like how are we actually contracting with the landowners, or what are our thoughts? Are land costs even included in there? I think most of the times financing teams tend to take out the land from this equation because it's usually a capex, or maybe it's on a lease agreement. But from the oil and gas side, it still is part of, somebody is either getting a royalty, somebody is either getting a lease, rental, and those can add up. So really having those kind of all these inputs tightened would actually help in reducing the well construction costs. Completions, I think oil and gas has really seen some of the cost reduction by maybe creating internally the sand or frac fleets, or using technologies that are actually, going from different proppant sizes and stuff like that. So really fracking with that cost in mind, and always technology changes, so you have to really be innovative and competitive and as lean as possible. I think that's also key, because when the I don't mean it literally, but there's a saying, if the elephant gets bigger, then you actually would have to feed the elephant, right? So then, the operating costs and the overheads get very big. So how do you actually keep that cost down as much as possible as well?
Okay, so I'm going to ask a crystal ball type of question, uh, and but when you're looking at that, and we saw the evolution of shale, which you alluded to with some of your presentation as well. We saw a number of black swans, right, between walking rigs and all kinds of synergies that came to fruition, and then it helped it scale significantly with some of the innovation that took place in shale. Do you see any of that in geothermal today, or do you see the potential for that in geothermal?
I see a big potential for that in geothermal. I think, and that's a very good saying. It's a black swan, because many people probably still don't believe it. And again, Permian happened, right? Shale happened in 2011. Many people were thinking it wouldn't happen. There was no way that shale could be fracked, right? With the high frack pressures, and again, people actually, we're humans, we're engineers. We tend to engineer the solution out, and I think that's important to. So there's a lot of opportunity. That's, I think people are doing like millimeter wave type drilling, but that's probably, applicable in some areas, with, of course, understanding all the risks and, practicalities of it. But if you think about the rigs, walking rigs. I mean, this is already again, you'd need multiple wells, high volume wells, to have that walking rig be effective. Because when I was actually drilling back in 2015, I was drilling a spud to rig release in 15 days, 13 days, and those are 18,000 feet wells. My surface was 6 hours. I was able to rig up in 6 hours, and so those type of really breaking down the connections, or breaking down the BHA makeups, and breaking down those processes will really help us to identify those opportunities even much faster, because then you're really looking for those low-hanging fruits that can be optimized. So whether it's an autonomous rig, whether it's automation, whether it's walking rigs, absolutely.
Fantastic. Thank you. And my last follow-up question on that is, we've talked a little bit about AI, and you alluded to that in some of your presentation. Are you seeing opportunities to incorporate AI? Can you get a little more specific about what that might look like?
Yes, I mean, AI is already in place in oil and gas, for example. Again, bringing from the oil and gas, reservoir is already doing a lot of AI. People are actually not going into those hand-drawn maps anymore, like geologically. A lot of the fault distribution, discrete network, modeling, those are being done by AI. So with very little 2D seismic, I can actually have a 3D picture of understanding the faults. of understanding my pre-drill hazards, and so a lot of the reservoir simulation work from the oil and gas is already being done by AI. Now transferring it for understanding the heat in place, or understanding how much can be extracted, and understanding when the well has been drilled to start monitoring, because a lot of these wells, in geothermal 2.0, like which I call the EGSs, for example, are already equipped with fiber, gauges, smart optics. So you're getting data in real time, so you can make those predictions before, say, the big decline happens, or at least can we engineer the system out before, so there's a lot of initiatives within drilling is quite advanced with AI. You can monitor connections. You can do a lot of the drilling, early kick detections. You can actually do that with AI already. A lot of systems like predicting and preventing stuck pipe. But I like to caution, it's just like any other AI tools, there's always going to be dependent on data quality. So if my data quality input is bad, my output will also be bad. So it's something really to always keep an eye out, because a lot of the public data set, for example, in the geothermal data bank, like the ones that are there, we don't know until we collect some of the data ourselves, right? Or understanding what kind of logs to run, petrophysics to understand, rock mechanics, Young's modulus, geomechanical, analysis. There is probably a lot of data from the oil and gas, yes. So those are very helpful. Some of the regulatory bodies like RRC, or California has a very rich database of public available data, but data quality is going to be important. How many null values are there, or negative 999.25s that give an erroneous result? That's going to be important for our understanding that validation of AI. But no, I mean, AI, we can directly take a lot of these AI codes from the geothermal industry, sorry, from the oil and gas industry, to the geothermal. For example, there is the valve. If anybody is used to the valve data set, they already have a Slipner CO2 sort of sequestration storage code out there in the GitHub, which is open. The Valve dataset is also very open to public. Forge data bank in the GDR has a lot of data that can be used for some of this analysis. But I think a lot of brings up a good point, and that's probably where that consortium should happen, is more data needs to be available, and more data, through either the consortiums or through the operating collaborations, right?
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So back to another question. On the LCOE slide, I noticed that you denote EGS exploration risk is high. Can you please expand on why you see it that way?
Um, so this is okay. Basically, the exploration risk is high. I think it has been, de-risked, but it's high in places where it hasn't been done, right? In places where it is, maybe there is a water scarcity, or there is, how are we actually going to look at areas of drought or areas of low water use, in those kind of places? What about your land footprint? How much really do we need in terms of the length of the laterals, or your wellbore drainage system, right? What is the thermal decline in those areas with sedimentary type basins instead of granite basins? So that's why I talk about the high, because it's just different formation, different rock geology, different mechanisms, and pretty, I think, straightforward in different types of areas with drought conditions or something like that, that we can't really use water. So that's what I meant.
Okay, great. And then can you speak, that sounds a lot like operational risk, which completely understand. Can you speak a little bit to the exploration risk?
Um, Exploration risk is
Well,
basically, really looking at your subsurface, so geology, how much data is there to really validate your the energy in that denominator to be stable for over 30 plus years, right? I think that is where that exploration would be. So really with the data set, so you still have to drill an exploration well, really collect a lot of the data. Uh, for example, which say University of Utah is doing with the Forge, right? But that's very specific to Utah. Can that be used in other parts, say in the globe, in Australia, or in Nevada, for example, or something like that. So, I think if I want to go and apply that in Nevada, I would probably still have to drill my exploration well to de-risk it with the data sets that I can get from there, that I can, that I want to use to simulate for 30 years and more of heat
Fantastic.
production.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I have another question. Scaling up geothermal, what will it take for the oil and gas industry to pivot more efforts to geothermal and really scale up geothermal drilling?
Investment, right? I think the large access to high, institutional investors and high, you're really talking about billion-dollar type plus investments. Or I think oil and gas, they're very centric to specific, what's core to their business. But I think for the geothermal industry, we just have to really go at it and open up the floodgates and have that belief that, like I showed you, so we need 3,000 wells to really go to that $10 target, for example. So to drill 3,000 wells, I need at least, if I'm talking about $10 million a well, then you're really looking at 300 million. So I need that investment to really go at it at a project scale, and then get out, that consistency and repeatability. Because I think consistency and repeatability is lacking in the geothermal, because one well could drill at 45 days, one is at 60, and one is at 16. How can we actually have it very repeatable and very predictable in pattern?
Fantastic. Thank you. And you referenced that when you spoke to modular options previously. Can you tell us some examples of where you think that might be an opportunity? And yeah, I mean, I think we alluded to that from shale, but do you see some modular opportunity with geothermal today? Or is there anything that you're hopeful for?
I'm definitely hopeful for some modular opportunities for geothermal. Once that I think everybody is still trying to optimize what that and this was discussed in some recent industry events is what is that standardization that even the suppliers would actually build some tools for us, right? If they're really going to build some tools, they need a steady scale project. They need to see that because they're not going to work for free for us, right? So they're going to they need to build that tool. They need to have that revenue, and without, so I think that standardization of, say, different hole sizes, different flow rates. I think everybody is still trying to get to that optimization rate with the 2.0, 3.0. Probably 1.0 is optimized already. But as 2.0 and 3.0 evolves, we need to get there, and how we can actually standardize is doing one and getting the results and then repeating it right away. So instead of taking 10 wells to have that learning curve, can I actually have 3 wells to have the learning curve? So I think that is going to be important for, I think, that answering that question too.
Fantastic. And it sounds like AI, from what you said, is going to play a role in being able to standardize that faster, right? Being able to
Yes,
model
absolutely.
that and better understand how that's going to play out. So no,
Exactly. I mean, if you're looking at, I mean, look, you saw during the COVID, how long did it take to actually come up with a vaccine? Probably definitely a lot slower, I mean, faster than what it was 20, 30, 40 years ago. So yeah, and you can see exactly. So AI will definitely play a role in that.
fantastic. Thank you. So I'm going to switch gears slightly here. And you talked a lot about the financial and performance metrics. What do you see as transferring directly from oil and gas that people will know and understand from the onset if they've got that background? Or what are some of the highlights of the differences that you see from oil and gas transferring to geothermal that's going to be significant?
Sorry, Kerry, could you repeat that question again one more time?
Sure. You talked about the financial and performance metrics towards
Yeah.
the end of the presentation. So, can you talk a little more specifically about some of what will be a direct, like many of those we recognize as direct transfers from oil and gas, right? We're familiar with those. Can you also speak to if there's something else that you want to highlight here that's an easy transfer that maybe we're not realizing today in the geothermal industry? And then what do you think will look quite different that people might need to better understand?
Right. Yeah. So I think from the oil and gas, there's, like that repeatability, consistency in dollars per, no, sorry, food per day is a very common metric, right? Everybody needs to be targeting a mile and 2 miles a day, for example. How can that be done? That's basically the constant pressure from management. So from the geothermal side is how can we reduce footprints? How can we reduce parasitic loads? How can we actually create that higher megawatt? So again, in the LCOE equation, the denominator has to go up big time to have a significant drop in the LCOE. So that energy transfer stability and having that high output yield is going to be important. So that's basically a lot of these things, such as injections, your mass balances, efficiencies, temperature decline, right? That's going to be very important to really create some of those, your mean time between failures of, your so heat production index. So, you're producing the heat with the water. So if it's for example, the EGS, what's your recovery rates factors or so heat over the water, for example. So there's a lot of those things that I think still need tweaking and optimization, but obviously a lot of these higher level can be standardized already. That can go into the company's, financial and performance goals. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. And so we have someone that put in a question, Amelia, that we're going to add to the chat with some additional information. Thank you, Amelia. We're going to stick that in. And then what do you see? Or I'm going to ask, we're kind of running out of time here quickly. So I'm going to ask kind of a concluding question, unless we have anything else from our audience. I don't see any more questions pending, which is fantastic. What do you see as the most significant tailwind and headwind for the industry? We've talked about all kinds of things today, and you shared a lot of great, valuable information. But if you, again, looking into that crystal ball, right? What do you see as some of the biggest challenge or the biggest challenge for the industry moving forward and scaling and doing a lot of these things that you speak of? And what's your most hopeful headwind? I'm sorry, tailwind.
I think the biggest headwind is definitely the traction. Especially, I know living in Texas, and Texas has a very good deregulated, opinion on geothermal, grids, injection, interconnections, interconnectivities. It's much more free, entrepreneurship. But in other states, I see there is still a little bit of, in order to go into the grid, I really have to go through multiple, layers of RCOT or ETT or, the different grid systems, electric type system. So there's that. Obviously, the tariffs are going to be a little bit of a tailwind. I think even the Lazard's report has mentioned that there's, because tariffs directly hit the steel, and that means the casing. That means my well construction. That well construction equation, my drilling costs will go up, my completion tubulars will go up. So that's definitely going to increase, and that means if I do have to increase my cost, what's going to be an impact to that IRR and ROIs? So from that front, I think there's a little bit of skepticism and it's just the timing, right? With the tariffs. But I think there is still definitely some good traction in geothermal acceleration. But getting to those high volume or high dollar investments is, I see that if people are actually looking at it from the oil and gas scale, they will understand. And I think there's still going to be really good momentum for that. Other than that, I think really, yeah, I think grid access is going to be important, and I think a lot of folks in the renewables, even when I started in the US DOE project with Forge, I knew that there were limitations with the rig. I knew that there were also issues with performance. We couldn't perform drill it at that time, right? We couldn't performance drill. But in 2015, performance drilling was happening, right? And that was before even the Forge initiative started. So I think there is a lot of, I think that's why that benchmarking with the oil and gas type mentality and mindset will be very important. And not looking at it as a geothermal well, but look at it as an oil and gas well, because you're still going to drill through the same formations. You're still going to, have the same ways that you select bits. You're going to have the same now. Performing rigs is going to be important. So it's just like going back a few years ago that offshore, how offshore investments happened. I think everybody needs to remember and refresh on how offshore investments, because I think with the shale boom, everybody forgot offshore. And those offshore investments were 50 plus, 100 million plus wells and producing for 20 years, very prolific reservoirs, highly permeable. And, I was on Wichita, Thunder Horse. I was on, Shell's Gulf of Mexico deep water. Those wells are still producing. So that's the thing. So we need to now. I think there's going to be a good traction. Thinking like the offshore, having some of those bigger rigs made, walking systems, and going forward. But tariff will definitely be a tailwind because again, it contributes a lot to the steel, to the rig, and all the other industry as well.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. And I want to just take a minute to again thank Nasik for joining us today from Exceed Energy. This has been a fantastic presentation. Thank you, sir. And thank all of you for joining us. Next month should be on surface, some additional surface infrastructure. So we're delighted to welcome you to join us next month or any of our upcoming events. So have a great day, and we will see you at the next Full Stream Ahead series.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Kerry.